Quotient rule. Objectives by this lesson rule. Objectives by this lesson, you should be able to recognize when you should use the quotient rule and apply the quotient rule to find the derivative and simplify your result. So the quotient rule, it's usually one of the easier two to figure out. Product rule and quotient rule. Quotient rule is generally by far the easiest one to figure out when to use it. But let's go over what it actually is. So if f and g are differentiable functions, then f divided by g is also differentiable for all x such that as long as the derivative doesn't equal 0, it can divide by 0. You get this. Now, I'll show you this down here is one that's like favored by a lot of high school teachers, and I think I remember hearing about it in college. I've never liked low d high minus high d low. I always get confused on which way to do it. It never worked for me. The way I do the quotient rule is I just remember it's like the product rule. It's like the product rule. But with the minus. But subtraction instead of addition. Also, you're dividing it by the bottom squared. So in my head, it's always like I just do like the product rule. I just do it just like the product rule. Just I remember it's a subtraction sign instead of an addition sign, and you have to divide by the bottom squared. Only tricky part, and the part that this is trying to get you to remember, is that to derive the top first. Like because it's like okay, right? Product rule doesn't matter because you're adding, so it doesn't matter if you do first. I always do the first one first, product rule, and here I just tell myself to derive the top first. So anytime I'm confused, it's the derivative of the top goes first. So I think about it as the derivative of the top times the bottom minus the derivative of the bottom. So now I just switch it times the top all over the bottom squared. That's what I think about it. And mostly I just think, only part I gotta think about is this part right here. It's like I gotta remember to tell myself it's the derivative of the top first. So the rest of it's just like the product rule, right? So derivative of the top times the other one minus, then you switch it all over the bottom squared. But if you want like a way to memorize it, this is one way to do it. Again, I've never been the biggest fan because I always kind of confuse which goes first. But that's the way to do it. Warning, just like product rule, there's a whole formula for it. You don't just divide them separately. So product rule, quotient rule, there's a formula for them. If you have to multiply two functions, use the formula. If you have to divide two functions, use the formula. So let's do a couple examples. If that's to try to find the derivative of each of the following using the quotient rule. So let's do this one. This one you don't need to do the quotient rule for, but let's do it first as a practice. So if I was doing this the quotient rule way, I take the derivative of the top, which is 0, times the bottom left alone, minus the derivative of the bottom, 2x, times the top left alone, all over the bottom squared. So at 0, I get negative 2x over x to the 4th. These reduce, I get negative 2 over x cubed. So as doing the quotient rule, it does work. It's not the easiest way to do that though. The easiest way to do this is just rewrite it. X to the negative 2, and then the derivative of that would equal, bring the 2 down, subtract 1 off, or negative 2 over x cubed. Right, so again, product rule will work, quotient rule will work on this, but not the easiest way. You just want to flip that up. So anytime there's like a single number on top, has to be like a constant. It can't be a variable. Then you just flip it up and then do it the power rule way. Next one, we can't do that. The next one, stuck. We have to do this using the quotient rule. So let's do it. The top goes first. So here's the quotient rule. Right, so if I have an f over g, derivative of the top goes first, times the bottom, minus derivative of the bottom times the top, all over the bottom squared. So here's my top. So derivative of the top is 1 times the bottom left alone, minus derivative of the bottom, which is 2 times the top left alone, all over the bottom squared. Like that. Then from here we can simplify. So this is 2x plus 3. Very important here that negative 2 goes to both of them. A lot of people miss that. A lot of people give me a negative 2 out here. That negative goes to both. This is negative 2 times both of them. Adding like terms, these cancel out, and I just get 5 over 2x plus 3. So there we go. The next one could also be done by quotient rule, but there's actually an easier way of doing this one. Using algebra tricks. So the algebra rule is, if you have this, you could separate it. A over c plus b over c. Now keep in mind, this is not true if you flip it. This does not equal c over a plus c over b. That's bad. So it's only when the monomial is on the denominator you could do it. So in this one I can split it up. Like that. And again, notice I'm still doing algebra yet. Still doing algebra right now. And then this is x. These cancel. This cancels to be 1. Remember when they cancel, it's a 1. Now I can't do anything here, but I cannot take a derivative yet because you can't take it with the x on the bottom. You have to flip it up. X to the -1. That's what I was trying to say a second ago. Keep in mind, you haven't done any calculus yet. This is all algebra. So a lot of people, some people will stop here and be like, done. Like, you didn't do any calculus. You haven't taken a derivative yet, like I want. So now let's take a derivative. So the derivative of the first one is 1. Derivative of the constant goes away, and that's 0. And derivative of this one is bring it down, subtract 1 off. So -1 x to the -2. If I want to write it a little nicer for multiple choice, it would be 1 minus x over, 1 minus 1 over x squared. So again, free response, multiple choice. Let's move on. Next one, again, we're taking derivative of all these. Next one here, the thing I can do here is to straight out this quotient rule, f over g. Right, so again, I'll write it one more time. The derivative of quotient rule is the derivative of the top times the bottom minus the derivative of the bottom times the top all over the bottom squared. Again, to me, just like the product rule, right? Derivative of the top one, do the other one alone, minus instead of a plus, the only difference. Derivative of the bottom times then derivative of the bottom times the top all over the bottom squared. It's also a difference. But for me, the structure is much more like the product rule. Anyway, so the derivative of the top is 4 times the bottom left alone, minus the derivative of the bottom, which is 2x, times the top left alone, all over the bottom squared. Now here's a general rule. We generally leave the bottom. If we square something, we generally leave it the way it is. Very rarely do you want to expand it out so you actually could cancel things out. Most of the time you just leave it the way it is. From here we could simplify the top. As to, again, if it's free response, feel free to leave it. Multiple choice, you do gotta match it, so we'll pretend it's multiple choice we can match. I cannot stress enough, again, that negative goes with the 2x. So I would get 4x squared plus 4 minus 8x squared plus 4x all over x squared plus 1 squared. Add like terms. Those are not like terms. There we go. Those are like terms. Negative 4x squared plus 4x plus 4 all over x squared plus 1 squared. So, product rule to the rescue. Quotient rule to the rescue, sorry. Next one's, that's another quotient rule, but there's actually a trick here. When we do our quotient rule, right, derivative of the top times the bottom times the derivative of the bottom, look at the derivative of the bottom. How many x's do you see? 2 separate x's. This is a product rule. So it's a product rule inside the quotient rule. So like if this is f and this is g, right, we know the product rule. So let's do the product rule. The derivative of the top, which is 1, times the bottom left alone, minus the derivative of the bottom. So I'm going to change the color, so we'll do the derivative of the bottom in orange. The derivative of the bottom is a product rule. So we need to do derivative of the first one, 1, times the second one left alone, plus the derivative of the second one, which is just e to the x, times the first one left alone. That's all the derivative of the bottom. I still got to multiply by the derivative of the top, which is, oh sorry, by the top left alone, which is x minus 1. Then on top of that, don't forget, all over the bottom squared. So like that. So again, sometimes it helps people when they label things. They're like, here's the f, here's f prime, sorry, here's g minus g prime times f, all over g squared. Now again, free response, feel free to look like this. Multiple choice, go to the match. So let's practice our matching. So this is just the way it is. There's nothing to do there. So that's just me x e to the x. Over here, we have to distribute. It's like binomial times a binomial. So we got to multiply e to the x times x, which would give us, so again, oh, okay, give me a second. Let's put the bracket on the, let's take the negative out of this for a second. Let's put it on the outside. Let's just multiply this and then we'll distribute the negative afterwards to make it a little easier. So ex times x, this is x ex. Ex times 1, negative e to the x. Now we'll do this one. I'm going to get positive x squared ex. And then here times here I get negative x ex. All over, don't need this anymore, the bottom, which is ex. Let's leave it at that for now. I might have to simplify this a little bit later. Okay, now simplify this inside. I got x ex, I got a negative x ex, so those cancel. I got e dx, something else happens here, but I can distribute this negative. So now I get x e to the x plus e to the x minus x squared e to the x all over x squared e to the 2x. I simplified the bottom a little bit because I figured we were going to be able to simplify this. So, you have that. Is there anything more I could do? Well, notice on top they all have an ex. Again, we're trying to simplify. We're trying to match our answer. Our answer wouldn't be like, on the multiple choice, would not look like this. We got to simplify a little bit more. These all have an ex. So let's factor out an ex. On the top, you're left with x plus 1 minus x squared. Right, so took all that out. On the bottom, I have this. It's because I did simplify a little earlier. Now here's something that's a little tricky to see, right? So how I went from ex, that squared one of both of them. I got x squared ex squared, also known as e to the 2x. So there's two ex's here. So one of these cancels out with the ex right there. And that's pretty much all we could do. If I write it one more time, I'll make the top a little nicer. All over x squared ex. And that's how it would look like on the multiple choice. It would be that right there. That would be the answer you'd be trying to match. Anyway, last one. Let's take a derivative of x cubed over f of x. So to straight out this product rule, quotient rule. Keep on saying product rule, sorry. Straight out this quotient rule. So we're going to do the derivative of the top, x 3x squared, times the bottom left alone, minus the derivative of the bottom. Now the derivative of f of x is just f prime of x, times the top left alone, all over the bottom squared. Pretty much it. Again, unless it's multiple choice and we want to match, we really can't cancel anything out, but we could factor a little bit. They both have an x squared. So this is practice for factoring. So pull out an x squared. I'm left with 3 f of x minus x f prime of x on top. And on bottom, I'm just left with f of x squared. So that'll be the answer. So keep in mind, quotient rule is a lot easier to tell when you have to do a quotient rule. Like you can tell it's dividing. Sometimes it's a little tricky because you can flip stuff up and down, but for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. And then just remember, you have to remember the way to do it, and that's just the derivative of the top. Right, if I get f of g, the derivative of the top times the bottom minus, then you flip it. Derivative of the bottom times the top, all over the bottom squared. If you have that down, to me it's just kind of like the product rule, then you should be fine.